Hello students, welcome to BBA 432 International Business Management. In today's lecture, I will be talking about foreign direct investment and some of the collaborative strategies that lead companies to seek foreign direct investment. Here are the chapter learning objectives. We will talk about why export and import may not suffice for companies' achievement of international business objectives, and we will be looking at some of the motivations that motivate companies to engage in foreign direct investment in different parts of the world. And we will also talk about why companies collaborate in international markets. We will compare and contrast forms of and considerations for selecting an international collaborative arrangement, and also examine why international business strategic and collaborative arrangements fail or succeed. So let's start with the export-import issue. So as we discussed in the previous chapter, sometimes the exporting and importing strategies may not be most optimal for companies' achievement of international business objectives. Okay? Sometimes companies may find more advantageous or more profitable to locate production in foreign countries than simply exporting to them. The advantages occur, according to international business literature, the advantages occur when these 6 conditions are satisfied. So advantages to locate production in the form of foreign direct investment is advantageous only under the following conditions. So the question of why companies engage in direct investment as opposed to exporting their products to other countries is the key issue to examine here. And this foreign direct investment occur only under these specific conditions. So let's look at those 6 major conditions, right? So FDI advantages occur when production abroad is cheaper than at home, or when transportation costs are too high for moving goods or services internationally. It also occurs when companies lack domestic capacity, or the products and services need to be altered substantially to gain sufficient consumer demand abroad. Sometimes governments also inhibit the import of foreign products, or buyers prefer products originating from a particular country or other countries. So this figure 15.2, shows alternate foreign expansion strategies as opposed to exporting, right? So here is the summary of alternative operating modes. Okay, so the production location can be either home country or foreign country. Okay, home country might be exporting, but if the exporting strategy is no longer feasible, companies switch to FDI, direct investment strategy as a way of expanding abroad and making more money. Okay? So this foreign expansion, meaning FDI, can be in the form of equity arrangements, right? Equity arrangements meaning companies owning shares or ownership in other companies, right? This can be in the form of wholly owned operations, partially owned with remainder widely held, joint ventures, which are 50-50 or 40%, 60% deals, or it can also be in the form of equity alliances, right? Licensing, franchising, management contracts, and turnkey operations. So basically, joint ventures, equity alliances, licensing, franchising, management contracts, and turnkey operations, which can also take place in a foreign country, are generally non-equity arrangements. So we have two types of foreign expansion abroad. One can be either in the form of equity arrangements, and the other can be in the form of non-equity arrangements. But then why wholly owned FDI? Okay, so it's important to understand and explain why and how companies make wholly owned foreign direct investments. Wholly owned meaning that company buys or merges with or purchases or takes over another company in a foreign environment. Okay, so the company becomes a wholly owned subsidiary of the parent company, and there's 100% ownership, meaning 100% equity stake in the company. Okay, so there are four primary explanations or reasons for companies to make a wholly owned FDI. One is the market failure argument. In the case of a market failure, collaboration is appealing as an entry strategy because it is a means whereby a firm may reduce its liability of foreignness. But this works only if management can find an associate knowledgeable about the host country at acceptable terms, which may be impossible since such companies may be inadequately equipped to deal efficiently with the entry company's technology. So let's look at the internationalization theory justification or argument or explanation for FDI. What does international theory say about FDI? So basically, internationalization is control through self-handling operations, right? It's control through self-handling operations. The concept comes from transaction costs theory, which says that companies should seek the lower cost between self-handling of operations and contracting another party to do so for them. Okay? So because companies are concerned with cost efficiency, they are more likely to move their operations abroad. Okay? The third explanation is appropriability theory. Appropriability theory. The idea, this is all about the idea of denying rival companies access to resources, right? Appropriability is all about the idea of denying rival companies to access resources. So companies are reluctant to transfer vital resources. So what do we mean by these vital resources? It can be capital, patents, trademarks, and management know-how, right? They are reluctant to transfer these vital resources to another organization for fear of their competitive position being undermined. So rather than transferring knowledge to rival companies, companies might decide to directly invest in another country by taking advantage of its vital resources. Okay? And then the fourth objective can be freedom to pursue global objectives. Basically, a wholly owned foreign operation permits a company to more easily participate in a global strategy. Okay? So it's also important to understand the difference between a greenfield strategy and an acquisition, direct investment versus greenfield. So starting with the acquisition. Acquisition is all about a company investing abroad by acquiring other companies, right? So one reason for a company to invest abroad via acquisition is to obtain vital resource that may otherwise be slow or difficult to secure. That vital resource, as we talked before, it can be a vital raw material, a supply, an input, or a trademark, intellectual property, technology. And the other is the making greenfield investments. So greenfield investment is about foreign companies facing local roadblocks to acquisitions, right? Sometimes foreign companies may face local roadblocks to acquisitions. For example, local governments may want more competitors in the market because of fearing market dominance. Okay? In addition, a foreign company may find that development banks prefer to finance new operations because they create new jobs. Okay? So basically, greenfield investment is a form of investment, in other words, that puts together everything from scratch. It is a new form of investment. It's a new form of investment that creates new jobs, new products, and so forth and so on. Greenfield investment means starting a business from scratch in a foreign environment. Okay? This is not a matter of acquiring or taking over already established businesses. Greenfield investment is a new enterprise established in a foreign country. It can be in the form of a local branch or it can be in the form of a subsidiary. Okay? Leasing. Leasing is a pretty much like an acquisition, but one that forgoes the need to invest. Okay? While common in the hospitality industry, it is not common in others. Although companies in other industries might lease certain assets abroad, such as computers, vehicles, buildings. However, such arrangements are quite different from leasing an entire operating facility. So in the case of leasing, the companies lease an entire operating facility, so which might be like an acquisition, okay? While, as I said, this strategy is common in the hospitality industry, whereas it is not common in others. Okay? So this figure, 15.3, sort of illustrates why collaboration arrangements may occur. Okay? So let's look at some of the motivations behind the collaborative arrangements. So some of these motivations can be related to the objectives of international business. By expanding abroad, the company may seek sales expansion, resource acquisition, risk reduction. There are also general objectives, which is the objective of spreading and reducing cost, specializing in competencies, avoiding or countering competition, and learning from other companies. Whereas some of the objectives are specific to the company and the international business, such as gaining location-specific advantages, overcoming legal constraints, diversifying geographically, or minimizing exposure in risky assets. So there are also some other factors to consider in collaborative arrangements, because these factors might be related to the trade-offs and limitations of investing directly abroad. Okay, there are some trade-offs and limitations, right? If you recall from the previous figure 15.2, that operating modes for foreign operations differ in the amount of resources a company commits and the proportion of the resources it locates abroad. In this respect, keep in mind that there are trade-offs, meaning that a decision, let's say, to take no ownership abroad, such as by licensing another company to handle the foreign production, it can reduce the exposure to political risk, right? Because licensing is a form of building a distribution network. But in the case of licensing, like franchising, the company does not do direct investment. Rather, it licenses another company to handle the foreign production. Therefore, the purpose here is, in the case of licensing, is to reduce the exposure to political risk. Okay? Alliances. So if we look at alliance types, alliances also vary by objective and by place in the value chain. These variances have led to terms that describe different types. There is a scale alliance, for instance. Scale alliance is all about providing efficiency for partners by pooling similar operations, such as airlines have done so by combining their lounges, for instance. In a link alliance, firms use their partners' complementary resources to expand into a new business. For instance, if you look at the company Nokia used the link alliance strategy to develop and market cellular phones. A vertical alliance, on the other hand, connects firms in different links of their value chains, such as a food franchisor with a franchisee. A franchisor with a franchisee is a form of vertical alliance. And there is also horizontal alliance, such as, for instance, the Mexican joint venture between Mercedes and Infiniti, which enables each partner to extend its product offerings. Okay? There is also prior company expansion. Each time a company adds products or businesses that it wishes to internalize, it must decide on an operating form. If it already has operations in a foreign country, some of the advantages of collaboration are no longer as important. And there's the final aspect is the compensation. Collaboration also implies sharing revenues and knowledge, an important consideration when profit potentials are especially very high. Licensing, for instance, if we look at other types of arrangements, which is a contrast to direct investment, the other type of arrangement is a licensing and franchising agreements. The alternative arrangements, they have non-equity strategies. In these arrangements, there is no equity ownership. Like in the case of licensing, for instance, the rights for use of intangible property may be for an exclusive license. The licensor in this case, let's say McDonald's, can give rights to another company for the specified geographic area for a specified period of time. it could be a non-exclusive one. Let's say McDonald's giving the license to a licensee who is an investor in a foreign environment, and the licensee takes the responsibility of producing products similar to the ones produced by McDonald's. Franchising is a special form of licensing. It's a special form of licensing, okay? The parties almost act vertically integrated company because they are interdependent and each creates part of the product or service that ultimately reaches the consumer. And then we have management contracts. Management contract is all about an organization which may pay for managerial assistant under a management contract when it believes another can manage its operation more efficiently than it can, usually because the contractor has industry-specific capabilities. There is something called the turnkey operations. Turnkey operations. This is all about the companies handling turnkey operations are usually industrial equipment manufacturers. Industrial equipment manufacturers, construction companies, or consulting firms engage in this type of turnkey operations. Manufacturers also sometimes provide turnkey services when they are disallowed to invest. Joint ventures, although we tend to use joint ventures usually think it of as 50-50%, joint ventures may nonetheless involve more than two companies and ones in which a partner owns sometimes more than 50%. There might be 60 to 40% or 55 to 45% equity ownership. As I said, joint venture is all about ownership, equity ownership, whereas management contracts, franchising, licensing, they do not imply any ownership or equity stake in other companies. Equity alliances is another form of collaborative arrangement in which at least one of the companies take an ownership position, almost always a minority ownership in the others, okay? So we have here joint ventures and equity alliances indeed imply equity ownership, whereas in the case of joint ventures, it can be either 50-50 or majority ownership, whereas in the case of equity alliances, generally, almost always, one of the companies, at least one of the company, takes a minority ownership. Here are the collaborative strategies and the complexity controls. Here, figure 15.4 shows these different collaborative options and the level of control, meaning the type of investment made in a country, the type of equity stake, the degree, the level of equity stake in the company as measured by ownership, right? So in the case of like when we talk about wholly owned, there's a tight control because wholly owned companies are owned 100% by the parent company. So parent company buys the other company, takes over or merges with the other company to create 100% ownership stake, right? Whereas in the case of consortium, joint venture and the equity alliances, the form and degree of ownership changes, right? We talk about this, the form and degree, because most of the time in joint venture, it can be 50-50 or 55% to 45%. In the case of equity alliances, as we said, one of the companies almost always have a minority stake, okay? And in the case of course, management contract, turnkey, franchise, license, sales contract, those are non-equity arrangements. There is really no ownership in the other company. Those are non-equity arrangements. Okay. But the question that needs to be considered is also the fact that sometimes collaborative arrangements fail. So why do these collaborative strategies fail? So here are some of the reasons of why they fail. The major constraints on the arrangements or the major strains on the arrangements are due to the 5 factors. It might be related to the relative importance to the partners. It might be related to divergent objectives, right? There might be control problems, control over the environment, control over the management, control over the employees of the different company. It might be related to comparative contributions and appropriations, and it might also be related to differences in the corporate and business culture. So there are some things to consider for collaborative success. Under what conditions do collaborative strategies work, or under what condition do they succeed? Aside from awareness of and adjustment to the pitfalls we have just discussed in the previous slide, the following considerations sometimes help assure success when choosing among and managing operating forms. So, fitting modes to country differences, finding and evaluating the partners carefully before buying stakes in other companies, negotiating agreements, the question of secrecy, how transparent and how open the parties are to each other is a very, very important factor that help that facilitate the success of the collaborative arrangements. Controlling through contracts and trust, evaluating continually, evaluating the project continuously, and also adjusting the international organization, adjusting the internal organization, adjusting the internal organization to new circumstances is also important factor that determines the future performance of these collaborative strategies. So here is the figure that illustrates why international business collaborative arrangements fail or succeed. Under what conditions do they fail? Under what conditions do they succeed? So this figure, figure 15.5, illustrates country attractiveness and company strength matrix. So you look at how attractive the country is as a choice of location versus how powerful the company is to pursue the international business strategy. Okay? So on the horizontal axis, you see the competitive strength, the company strength, the strength of the company, as determined by its internal resources as well as the departments, the strength of each department, right? And then on the other hand, you have the country attractiveness. How attractive is the country as a choice of location? Okay, so if the, let's say, competitive strength is low, right, the company will minimize commitment, such as through non-equity arrangements, right? If the competitive strength is low, the company will adopt non-equity arrangements, the type of arrangements that we talk about, like licensing, franchising, management contracts, and so forth and so on, right? So if the competitive strength let's say if the competitive strength is high, but also the country attractiveness is high, right? So both things are on the right scale, right? Competitive strength is high and country attractiveness is high. And this time the company is going to use wholly owned operation. It's going to try to maximize its commitment by using wholly owned operations, by having 100% stake or equity ownership in other countries. Okay? But let's assume if the competitive strength is medium, but the country attractiveness is also medium. So the company this time use individualized strategies to commit as an international business strategy. Okay? If the competitive strength, let's say, is low, but the country attractiveness is high, so which means is that the company is not powerful enough to pursue a foreign direct investment strategy because its competitive advantage is low. But on the other hand, country is a very attractive choice of location. This time, the company is going to seek collaborative arrangements in the form of joint ventures, okay? Because we're assuming that because of the limited competitive strength of the company will seek alliances in the form of joint ventures in order to invest in other countries. Again, in this chapter, we talk about several international business strategies that the companies used in order to invest abroad. We talk about different types of investments and collaborative strategies, and we also discussed why, under what conditions these collaborative strategies fail or succeed. Thanks for listening to my lecture, and in the next slide, I will talk about our last chapter, which is global supply management. Have a good day, and I will see you in the next chapter, which is going to be global supply chain management. Have a good night.